Welcome, everyone. As you come in, please drop your name and organization and where you're joining from in the chat. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, folks. As you come in, if you would drop your name and your organization and where you're from in the chat. Hi, Jamie from Rolling Harvest in Bucks County. Welcome, everyone. So many familiar names in the chat. Love it. Hi, everyone. We'll give it a couple minutes. We're going to give folks a couple minutes to find their link and get signed in. As you come in, drop your name and your organization and where you're coming from or dialing in from. Dialing in, wow, that sounds really old. Drop that in the chat. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. As you come in, drop your name, your organization, where you're from in the chat so we can see who's here and you can see who's here. Okay. Welcome, welcome. Okay, we'll get started in just a minute here. Let's see where we're at on time. Give it one more minute. Great, go ahead and drop your name and your organization and where you're joining us from in the chat, if you haven't already. As a reminder, as we go, if you can hold your questions till the end, you drop them in the Q&A section, not in the chat. We will lose it. That scrolls by really fast sometimes. So make sure to put it in the Q&A. And then as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available. We'll email you the link in the next couple of days. And then at the end of the webinar, we will give you some links to register for the next webinar. And if you want to request a follow-up meeting with myself or someone here at Food Rescue Hero, we will give you a link to do that as well. All right. With that, Karen, why don't we go ahead and get started? All right. So You're all here, so you're all a little bit interested at least, but let's answer the big question. Why bother? Why have a governmental relations strategy at all? And is this something that as a small organization, you can and should be worried about? There's a couple of reasons why it's helpful to know your elected officials and how they can help you. One is they can amplify what you're doing and they can be a community advocate. We just had in Pittsburgh, the mayor did a rescue last week, did a video of it, posted it, got a lot of great hits on that, a lot of eyes on that. People that maybe hadn't heard about us or seen our mission beforehand. Secondly, government officials can, of course, be helpful in writing, sponsoring, championing, and then passing helpful legislation. It's not just for California. We can have that in other places too, if we, work for it. And then, of course, to thwart bad legislation. And we had a situation in Pittsburgh a couple years ago where the health department thought they were being helpful and wanted to write new regulations around food recovery, and they were terrible. They would have really hamstrung our operations. And so we were able to, because we had good relations with some officials, because our volunteers were really engaged, we engaged with them and were able to stop that and have them rewrite it so that it was actually really helpful to us. So, just being prepared for those moments and understanding what to do when they occur, because it came out of nowhere. We were really blindsided by that. So those are some really strong reasons to have a plan in place for governmental relations. And of course, there's kind of two main ways you are going to be engaging with your officials. One is advocacy, and this covers all manner of things, including just having a conversation with them about what you do, about having them tour your operations, about having them do a food rescue so they can see what it's about. It also includes, talking to them about issues that affect the people that you serve, talking about how, food waste is really bad for the environment, how food rescue can really help feed people. It can be tangential to legislation, but really not directly talking about any relation or legislation, more about the issues at hand. Then there's lobbying, which is direct support or opposition to a very specific piece of legislation. And much to, contrary to what a lot of people think, you can actually lobby as a 501c3. The IRS has rules about how much lobbying you can do, but you can lobby. Next slide. Some examples of both of these advocacy would be, telling legislators how federal grants helped your constituents or local grants even, educating them about the impacts of policy that exists, inviting them to visit your organization. And then, of course, lobbying would be asking them to vote for something. So, please vote for this bill that impacts us. A lot of us did lobbying around the Food Donation Improvement Act a couple years ago. That's a great example of using your voice to lobby for legislation that will help you. And of course, also asking your supporters to do the same. If you say, please call your senator and tell them that you are in favor of this bill, that is lobbying, even if you're not doing it yourself. Next. What you can't do is you cannot campaign for a candidate or state opinions about who your supporters should vote for. Obviously, you can do that as an individual, but you cannot do that as an organization. I think we all know that, but I want to throw that in there just to be clear. That's a big no-no. Next, yeah. So the restrictions on 501c3s doing lobbying, they're super generous, and most of you aren't even going to come close to scaring them. The general, the sort of standard measure is that lobbying cannot constitute a quote substantial part of your activities. That is not specifically designed. That is kind of a weakness there. It leaves it open to interpretation. However, there is a specific test, the expenditure test, if you fill out a particular form, which you can do at any point in the year, if you've engaged in a lot of lobbying in a particular year and you want to make sure that you have some protection, you can fill that out as late as December 31st. It's IRS form 5768, and that subjects your organization to the expenditure test. It is a gradated measure, so it's like the first million of your budget, you can spend up to 20%, or is it first 100,000 of your budget? Look it up. Can't remember. I should know that. I knew that before. But you can spend up to 20% of your budget to a certain point, and then the next chunk, it lowers it to 15%. It's a huge amount of money. I can't imagine anybody on this call is going to even come close to hitting that number. Okay, next. So those are sort of the basics around, why, what, how you should think about governmental relations. But there's some really specific opportunities on the table right now. And so we're really excited to have Nina Sevilla on the call. And I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name. I just realized I did not. She is the program advocate for food waste and food systems and nature. Love that title, at NRDC and part of the Zero Food Waste Coalition. And so she's going to talk to us a little bit about the Zero Food Waste Coalition, the Farm Bill, and then some other legislative opportunities. With that, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks Food Rescue Hero community for having me today. Really excited to be talking about this important topic. I'll just start by introducing myself. So I am at NRDC, like Jen said, and that is a national environmental advocacy organization that works on a whole range of environmental issues, from ocean conservation to building electrification and anything you could imagine in between we probably work on. But I sit on the food waste team, and our team's goal is to help our country achieve the national goal of having food waste by 2030. So we do that through federal policy work, state policy work, partnering with cities and counties across the country to help them implement programs and policies to reduce food waste. And then we also have a household education tool called SaveTheFood.com that has a bunch of recipes and tips and tricks on how to cook with scraps and fun things like that. But I spend most of my time on federal policy work. And like Jen said, I'm also here representing the Zero Food Waste Coalition, which I will start by talking about a little bit. So as the coalition, our goal is to influence policy at the local, state, and federal levels to, again, reach our national goal of reducing food waste 50% by 2030. And we're almost have 5.5 years left. So things are coming down to the wire, which is why I think this policy discussion is so important. Because I forgot to mention earlier, so I work at NRDC and I've been there for 5 years, but prior to NRDC, I worked at the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona. So I am coming from the food rescue world too. And I think it's so important, like our day-to-day work is so important, but we also have the ability to, and I think, I'm blanking on the right word, but like a commitment to our communities to help change the broader system, and policy is one of those ways that can get us out of more systematic view. So I think, yeah, it's great that you're all here and talking about this. So back to the Zero Food Waste Coalition. Together, the coalition is now made up, we launched about a year ago, and now we have over 170 members across 40 states. Food Rescue Hero is one of our members. And together we have released policy reports. We've been involved in federal marker bills, which I will be talking about a little later, and have met with over 80 congressional offices. So my last thought about lobbying is that maybe, at least before I started getting into this, I kind of looked at lobbying and lobbyists as maybe a dirty word, but I think there's an opportunity to be a lobbyist for good here. So, which is what I've kind of become. So yeah, just happy to be here again. So last slide on the coalition. Like I said, our goal is to advocate for policies, but we also try to offer a central source of information, resources, and toolkits that will enable our partners like you all to go out and advocate for your own priorities, and that's just in general, increase the visibility of the food waste community and everyone working in this space. on a national level. So the membership is open to nonprofit organizations. We have a number of food rescue organizations, but also food businesses, nonprofits, local governments. So if you're interested in joining as your individual organization, my email is on the slide, but I can also drop it in the chat later. I'm bad at multitasking, so I'm not going to try to do it now. And then our website too, but I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what that means. But let's get into policies. So one of the reports that we did as a coalition was a big report called Opportunities to Reduce Food Waste in the 2023 Farm Bill. And I'm going to start, and most of this conversation is going to be talking about the Farm Bill, because that right now is the biggest opportunity that we have to influence food policy at a national level. So through this report, we identified over 30 different possible ways that the Farm Bill could address food waste, breaking it down from prevention and to rescue strategies to compost and anaerobic digestion strategies, and then just more national coordination. And from those over 30, we drew out our 4 top priorities for this Farm Bill cycle. The first is creating a food loss and waste reduction office within USDA to try to help with more coordination. Right now, there are pockets of USDA, the Department of Agriculture, and EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, who are all doing different bits on food waste reduction, but we think an office would allow better coordination across the government to really drive more impact. Our second priority is to increase funding for planning and infrastructure that will reduce food waste and also enhance food recovery. So this one might be of most interest to you all. One of the biggest things the federal government offers is funding. So our goal is to try to leverage this more so to support more things like organic waste bans or composting infrastructure, but also food recovery infrastructure, as you all know. And you are the experts in this space, not me, but I know we constantly hear of like cold storage, short like capacity problems and transportation issues. And so I think we're trying to help leverage some federal funding to meet those needs as well. The third is around funding research into all food chain activities and food waste reduction. So another big role that the federal government plays is broad research. In USDA has a research arm, and EPA as well. So we want to see more of that. And then lastly, our fourth priority is trying to standardize and clarify food date labels, which you probably also are familiar with as you encounter them in your work, but we're talking what most people call expiration dates. So we know that food doesn't expire when that date on the can is hit. It's often safe to eat afterwards. And these labels are not regulated across the country at the federal level. It's state by state, which leads to this patchwork of confusing terms like sell by, and all of that. So I'm going to get into a bill later that would standardize this. But yes, these are our top 4 priorities in this Farm Bill right now. So all of these priorities have handily fit into 2 marker bills. So a marker bill is just a term for a bill that's introduced, and the goal is to get it included in a larger legislative package, such as the Farm Bill. So it's like a marker saying we want this to happen, and here's the sample text. Here's the text you can use to like copy and paste into the bigger bill, basically. So there's 2 that the coalition is focused on right now. The first is the No Time to Waste Act, and it's a bipartisan bill in both the House and the Senate. And this covers the research aspect, the Office of Food Loss and Waste within USDA, and the infrastructure funding piece. And then our second is the Food Date Labeling Act, which covers food date labeling. And I'll dive into both of those in more detail right now. So like I said, the No Time to Waste Act kind of covers those first 3 priorities that I said. It strengthens federal agency coordination by authorizing the EPA, USDA, and FDA to work together officially. They already kind of do, but this would, I think, just help them have something to point to say, like, this is why this work is important, and Congress told us to do it. It would also establish an Office of Food Loss and Waste within USDA. It would free up some money for public and private partnerships around food loss and waste, and that's pretty vague, but I think it could be used for food rescue work too. It would strengthen current USDA research programs to direct them to look more into food waste, both at the farm and across the supply chain. It would provide money to states to assist local food recovery efforts. And it would also start a public awareness and education campaign through USDA. So a nationally coordinated food waste reduction and behavior change campaign. So this bill does a lot, but we're excited about it. And then the next one, thank you, is the Date Labeling Act. So this one would streamline food date labels across the country and say, if a manufacturer chooses to put a date label on the food, it would have to be one of two phrases. The first one would be best if used by, if it's just for quality. And then the second is used by, which would be for food safety and discard dates. So that would be on things like deli meat or other things that are truly unsafe if they're left out for too long. And the bill also would allow for donation of food past the quality date. I know different states have different laws about this, but this would preempt any of the state laws and say, everyone, it's okay to donate food past the quality date. And then it would also require some consumer education on what these date labels mean, because we know if we just change the dates, that's not necessarily going to change behavior. So some extra effort is needed to make sure that people really understand what these different things mean. And I'm really excited about this bill because, as you can see some of the stats, but ReFed, one of our coalition partners, has calculated that date labels account for almost 8% of all food waste and are one of the leading causes of food waste in the home. So this bill, I think, would really make a big difference. So next, I'm just going to take a step back and actually give you all a little more context about what the Farm Bill is. I'm sorry if you know this and it's redundant, but I figured it's always good to know a little bit more, and this bill is a big one. So if we can go to the next slide. The Farm Bill happens every 5 years, or it's supposed to, and it's usually made up of 12 different titles or sections. So this graphic from the Farm Bureau lists out the titles. There's commodities and disaster programs. So that's for if it's like crop insurance and things like that, which there is a title for that too. There's research, conservation, nutrition is the biggest one, and that's where SNAP lives. And as you can see, it kind of covers a range of things, but most of the food waste work will probably happen in the miscellaneous title. So that's where we're looking. And on the next slide, I just included this graphic so you can kind of see the broad reach or total impact of the Farm Bill is billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, $428 billion that goes into our food system. So that's why this is one of the biggest opportunities that we have to, influence change. And this green part, over 76% of the Farm Bill is the nutrition title. So that is the SNAP program. So most of the funding in the Farm Bill is going to SNAP. And then you can kind of see it breaks down for, I want to say a little bit, but it's still billions of dollars going into crop insurance and commodities and conservation programs that help farmers adopt more environmentally friendly practices and things like that. So it's a lot of money. And then the next slide. So this is kind of how it's supposed to happen. first, each agriculture committee in the Senate and the House drafts a bill, and then the agriculture committee votes on that. And if they agree, then it will go to the full chamber, and the full chamber will vote on that. And then once those pass, then the Senate and the House will take their versions and conference and go over and say, hey, ours said this, but you said that, and like, let's, come to a compromise on different aspects of the bill. So once they have a compromised version that they like, then they'll bring it to both full chambers again, and everyone will vote. And then once that passes, it will be sent to the president to sign, and then it will become a law. So if you go to the next slide, we are still here. I don't know if you caught in the first slide, but I'm going to go into a timeline on the next slide. But the last farm bill was done in 2018. So it was supposed to be expired. I laugh at the use of that word because I try not to use it. But 5 years from 2018 was September of last year. So we were hoping to have a farm bill in place last year. That obviously didn't happen. So what happened in last September was the House and the Senate extended the 2018 Farm Bill for another year, giving them more time to figure it out. Because if you remember back in September, the government was maybe going to shut down, and then it was maybe going to shut down at the beginning of this year too. So, and we had a new House Speaker, I think last fall, that was all going on. So I'll say with all the chaos in Congress right now, the Farm Bill did not get prioritized. So now that some of the funding is being settled for the rest of this year, the hope is that now lawmakers will have time to go back to this Farm Bill and continue the process with the goal of having having a draft soon and moving it before the election. Now, if that doesn't happen, then there's a likelihood that they would extend it again probably and wait until after the election to do another one. And by election, I mean like probably at end of summer, fall time, because that's when campaigns are going to ramp up and everything. So our hope is that things start moving soon, but you just never know with these things. So I also just wanted to highlight a few other marker bills that I thought you all might be interested in. In general, these ones are more specific to SNAP, so I'm not as familiar with them, but they were all recommended by FRAC, the Food Action Research Center, which is an organization that I think is well researched and reputable, and they focus a lot on SNAP in the food rescue space. So these 5 bills would do various things like eliminate some barriers to who can apply for SNAP, especially if you're working, increase the number of foods that could be eligible for SNAP dollars, such as like hot water at the grocery store, which I don't think is eligible right now, and a number of different things that I think are in general supported by the food rescue community. So I think these are also interesting to look into too. And then I finally just wanted to highlight a few other legislative opportunities outside of the Farm Bill. Like I mentioned at the top, the Farm Bill is the biggest opportunity right now, but there are a couple other ways that you can influence legislation and get your priorities in. One of them is through the appropriations process, which happens every year, and this is the government's budgeting process. So when they'll actually say allocate money to the different departments. And right now we are in the middle of the fiscal year 2025 process. So looking at next year and getting priorities into that. One of the coalition's focuses is just continuing to get money for this work within USDA. I should have mentioned before, but Right now, there is one full-time employee position within USDA called the Food Loss and Waste Liaison that is coordinating this work, but it's just one person, and so that's why we think an office would be better suited to, cover this broad range of work. But we just constantly want to make sure that her position is getting funding, so we keep an eye out for that in the appropriations process. I will add a little caveat here, because maybe you're wondering, is SNAP part of this appropriations process? But SNAP is actually the Farm Bill is a little special because it also allocates funding. No, not really any other big bills allocate funding. They just authorize programs, and then those programs need to be funded through appropriations. But there are programs within the Farm Bill that get money. And then there are programs within the Farm Bill that are just authorized and so need to be appropriated money through appropriations. The liaison position is one of those. But SNAP is one of those programs that gets the money that the Farm Bill says it's getting, and so it's not subject to this yearly thing. So if you're interested in the amount of SNAP and stuff, that would be in the Farm Bill. And then the second one that I thought would be of interest to this group is the Child Nutrition Authorization. And so this is the bill that covers school meals, after school meals, CACFP, summer meals, and WIC. And this bill, again, is supposed to be passed every 5 years, but the last one was passed in 2010 and has continually been extended since then. There was a couple of years ago, I think in 2022, we heard mumbling that Congress might try to create or do a new child nutrition authorization, but that never came to fruition. But there's always a possibility that this could come up, and I think there's a lot of potential opportunity here and interest. The other way, and lastly, I'll just say the other way that you could get any of your interests or bills passed is to have them pass as a standalone bill, but that very infrequently happens these days in Congress. So that's why we're looking at these big legislative packages like the Farm Bill or appropriations or child nutrition authorization to try to get our smaller priorities in as part of the bigger thing, just because of how Congress works these days. So I think that was my last slide, but would love to open it up for questions, or if I can, share it.
Hold the question for a minute.
Yeah.
Fine. We'll have a few more slides and then we'll open it up for questions. And I have questions. So that was super helpful, Nina. I learned stuff, and I feel like I've been in and around this world for a long time, and I still, that was extremely informative. So thank you for that. I just want to talk a little bit about how organizations can kind of take this information and take the idea of being proactive and create a plan. I think that some of the key things are knowing who your local officials or who your officials are, who are the elected officials, who are the non-elected officials that are really important in your area and to this topic. So keep a list of all of those officials, again, elected senators, congresspeople, state senators, state reps, but also things like, who runs your local health department, who is running the food waste, who's the food waste liaison at the USDA, just have that information living somewhere on your in your organization. Get to know the ones that you can, go visit them, have them do a rescue. As I think I was saying earlier, last week, we had the mayor, county executive, and some other local officials do a rescue. It really goes a long way to having them understand what your mission is and what the impact is. And when you go to ask them for something, it will resonate personally with them as opposed to just one of the many, many things they get asked to do. Share your impact, and that could be anything from sending them your impact report to having an event with elected leaders, with funders and whatnot, to share your impact, to talk about what your work means for the community. Next. And then look at what your priorities are. Look for opportunities and also threats. So, a couple years ago, we had the Food Donation Improvement Act. Now we have the Farm Bill at the national level. At the state level, there are a couple states that have food waste bans. Is that possible where you live? Is your state working on food waste? A lot of states right now are actually prioritizing food waste in anticipation of that 2030 goal. Is there something that you could do by creating a coalition in your state with other organizations? And then there's also funding opportunities. Your Department of Environmental Protection, as well as some of your other state agencies, may have funding that if you do some lobbying work, as Nina was demonstrating earlier, you can get included into their version of appropriations. And then don't underestimate local. I talked earlier about the health code rewrites. A local food waste ban, it's not possible in every locality, but in some it is. And that could really help you do your work better where you are. Next. And then create the right size plan for your organization. I understand some of you are operating with 2 people. That's where we started at 412 Food Rescue. That's where most food rescue organizations start. They start really small. So don't set out a overly ambitious plan that you can't accomplish. You're just going to get frustrated and not necessarily be able to do anything. But there's something that everybody can do. Just sharing on social media so your supporters can know what the issues are, can understand what's at stake, can make those phone calls. Leveraging them to go ahead and lobby. Some of them may have a line to elected officials. And then, of course, the big kahuna, if you have enough staff, if you can do this, is to create a campaign. Look towards something like a local or a statewide ban. Look towards getting your state DEP to fund food recovery as a standard line item and create a campaign. Look at how you can work with other partner organizations. Look at what you can do and really think about, how do we move that needle conclusively? And then similarly on lobbying, sending a email that goes to all of your local officials doesn't take a lot of effort. Calling their office to let them know that you're interested in this. That's a little bit more effort because you got to do each one individually. Then finally, if you have the bandwidth, create a lobby schedule. It can be a year-long lobby schedule. Go visit as many elected officials as you can, talk to them one-to-one, let them know what you care about. That is the most impactful thing you can do, but it may not be something that you can manage, and that's okay. Next. And then stay informed. Zero Food Waste Coalition is amazing. They're such a great resource for opportunities like this, but also, the NRDC, FRAC, which you already mentioned. I didn't put this on here. I can't believe I didn't. But the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, obviously ReFed, subscribe to all of these newsletters, and then just be on the lookout for what's happening. So, when you need to act, when that it's time to leverage those relationships that you've built over the past year and call your local officials. I'm going to, in a minute, drop the links for the next webinar in the chat. But before that, I want to turn to questions. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Nina, we have one already. This person wants to know if the food manufacturers are deciding which label to use. Might they just continue to use whatever they want? Or will they be beholden to those, what you talked about, the best by the state, used by the state?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So thank you for bringing that up. So manufacturers will, if the law passes, have to use one of those 2 phrases, but I know you were I think the question is kind of getting at, couldn't they just put a really early date on it, and then that still causes people to throw things away? And but so the approach with leaving up to the manufacturers was that the manufacturers are the ones already setting the dates. So we've had a pretty big outreach and like education push as part of our advocacy towards manufacturers and industry partners around what this means. And in order to try to address those concerns and make sure that they're not just like perpetuating food waste, but are truly like putting the right dates on and also playing their role in educating their consumers. So I think there is a concern, but I think we are trying to address that through education and partnerships. And we've had a number of industry folks sign on to a support letter for the bill, ranging from Kroger to Walmart, who's already started doing these things. And I think it's in the business's best interest, and they save money by not having to like overproduce and toss a lot of food. So trying to like use those levers to address the concern. It also makes the bill a little more attractive in Congress if we're not also asking Congress to calculate all the specific dates to put on different products and doing a lot more work that the industries are already doing. So I think there are ways to address your concern, but I totally hear where you're coming from.
I think it's a really important opportunity to get that standardized date labeling codified at the federal level. I think that, a lot of, well, they will be required to do it. Whether they do it or not, it depends on whether, who knows how enforcement will happen. Maybe enforcement won't happen. But eventually, I think that if all of the big manufacturers are doing it, the big, folks like Walmart are doing it, that will become industry standard. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing leading this. It's really critical. I have a question as well. So I know that you said the timeline was really before the election season gets underway in late summer. What is it that food recovery organizations should be doing now in order to get those marker bills, which I also did not know what they were, Jeff. I also learned that. I don't know that I've heard that term before, so that was really cool. To get them to incorporate those marker bills into the Farm Bill. What should we do?
Yeah.
And when should we do it?
The time is now. So yeah, I would say take a look. I can make sure that Jen and the Food Rescue Hero folks have the links to our reports, but and the FRAC one too. So I would say take a look at the stuff and see which marker bills speak to you, and then start reaching out to your elected officials, both in the Senate and the House. You can look on the elected officials' website. It will say what committees they're in, and so it's a super plus if your representative is on an agricultural committee, because they're the ones who have a little more power over what goes into the Farm Bill at first. So I'd say, especially if you have a member of the ag committee, you can send them an email saying this, or you can ask to set up a call, which is also really easy, and they will connect you with a staffer, and you can share more about your work and also share about some of your priorities. And then if your representative is not on an agriculture committee, I think it's still worth having the conversation, because when the bills go to the full Senate or the full House, they're still going to need to provide their support. So hearing directly from constituents that this is an issue that people care about makes a big difference.
Yeah. Julie asked a question that I want to touch on, and she asked that there's been a huge push for prioritizing compost in Cleveland, and they want to emphasize the importance of food rescue prior to composting, as demonstrated in food waste scale. One thing I would say, Julie, is the new calculations for the climate impact of food waste include the upstream impact, right? So it includes the contribution that growing, producing, transporting, storing, all of that, that food has on the environment. Because if you then throw it away, or compost it, you have to regrow it for somebody to eat. You have to regrow, remanufacture, retransport, restore, all of those things, right? So it more than doubles the climate impact. And I think that's what you want to start hitting on, is the fact that if you throw away food, and it's not used for food, people need to then grow more food for somebody to eat, right? So composting does not account for that. Compost is great for food scraps and food that's inedible, but for edible food, it is not a replacement, because you still have lost the majority of the climate impact, which happens upstream. Nina, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just going to drop a link to an EPA report that kind of lends some numbers to what Jen was saying. So this report shows that most of the climate impacts happen upstream. So if you want to address those, that's where you should do it. And it also shows, they did some calculations about the availability of wholesome food in our country, and showing that there actually is enough to feed people if we address these problems in the distribution and food, and help recover more food. So those stats I think could be helpful. I know there's a couple examples of places, and I'm trying to think, I know California did this, and maybe Washington State, but states, when they enact a landfill ban, so saying you can't send organics to the landfill, that then incentivizes more compost infrastructure. Those bills also had a food rescue requirement that said, I think in California, for example, it was, I don't want to say the number because I don't remember, but I'll try to find. Sorry?
It was 20%.
Yes, that sounds right. Yeah. So 20% of the edible food had to be recovered before anything was sent to a landfill. So there are examples that I think you could point to there too.
Agree. I think the impact of food that's thrown away, the upstream impact of food that was thrown away, and I think it's in that EPA report, was the equivalent of something like 30 coal-fired power plants running for a year. Can't remember the exact number, but it's crazy when you think about that. And that's the number I throw out when somebody says composting, is that it's great. We get great soil out of it. It's perfect for inedible food scraps, but it should be a last resort for edible food scraps. I think there was another question. Nope, Julie just wanted the citation. Other questions? So for folks that want to get involved, and I know you said, oh, here we go, there's one here. Any thoughts on resources on the impact of diverting any and all food excess to farms for animal feed, on the animals specifically? Could this be problematic? Could this be a problematic issue in animals, especially those in our food system? I think, are you asking if we could be introducing problems into animals that we could be then eating, therefore bringing those issues into the food system? I'm not sure what you're asking. There we go. Okay. I do know that there's actually some regulation on what you can give. Oh, it's either pigs or cows. I looked at where they can get really sick from if you give them food scraps. It must be cows. You actually have to process it before you give them food scraps, or else they could get bovine botulism or something like that. I researched this years ago. Especially highly processed. I don't know. I haven't seen anything on that, Victoria. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And if you go back to the environmental impact, though, you're losing all of the resources that you put into growing and processing and transporting and storing and that food in the first place. And you have to redo it, even if it's going, even if you're giving it to animals that will eventually be fed. It's a very, very high impact, low result way to process or create food.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I don't Also, I don't know of any data showing the impacts of feeding animals highly processed food, but I just lift up what Sean said. I think the first thing, obviously, that we'd like to do if there is good food to eat is make sure it gets to people. But then if not, and if it's appropriate for animals, I think I agree, like not everything is appropriate for animal feed, but if it is, then that's another good way to keep it out of the landfill too. But I am not sure of specifics.
And I just want to point out that there are a lot of nonprofits that have animals that if you run into, if you have like somebody gives you a couple of pallets of something and the bottom ones are sometimes sketchy at the bottom. There are farm sanctuaries, there are oh my gosh, no ability to articulate this. Wildlife animal rehabilitation uh, locations. Even our local zoo has taken food from us in Pittsburgh. So those are great places if you have an edible food and you don't have a place to take it for composting or anything else. And frankly, I think taking it to an animal that they would have to purchase food to feed that animal is better than composting.
And I'll just add one more layer here is that in industrial farms, what animals are eating are often also like highly processed and corn and soy stuff that I also don't know what the impacts of that on a too is.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a question from Kristen, and this is for everybody. It's if you're a nonprofit and the quality of food items you receive from a vendor isn't amazing, if compost is the last resort for edible scraps, how do we reconcile giving the food to individuals and families? People on the receiving end of pantry lines and food programs don't want to feel like they're last in line between a manufacturer and the landfill or the compost pile. I agree, but I think the food that is rescued is generally really high quality. When you get low quality food, there's other things you can do with it. There are kitchens that can process it, that can take, a zucchini that has a spot on it, a growth spot on it, and cut around it. Um, you know, Animal nonprofits if it's really no good. And you should not be giving that food that's really no good to a nonprofit to deal with. You're just taking somebody else's garbage and making it their garbage. But in general, the quality of food that's received through food rescue is very high. Yeah, exactly. We don't take food that's not appropriate for human consumption. Yeah, Liz, sometimes we've ended up, no one noticed it and it's on the truck and you've got a crate that isn't any good, or you dig down into it and you suddenly realize they're terrible at the bottom. And those are the things that end up for animals. And sometimes we've done that. We've had in Pittsburgh, we had somebody, a restaurant that had gotten an order of corn and it was buggy. And so they couldn't use it. And we took that to an animal nonprofit. It was better than them throwing it in the garbage. Yeah, I'd feed anything that we rescued to our families or to my family or myself. I'd eat it. Are there any other questions? Looking.
I think there's one in the Q&A.
Yeah. Somebody heard that unless compost is done correctly, it still emits methane. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can take this one. So it's true, anytime you break down organic materials, there is going to be a release of methane. However, composting, I think, is a better way to handle that methane and also ensure that the other nutrients and pieces of the food scraps are broken down and then make it back into the food, into growing more food in more of a closed loop way. Whereas if a bunch of food scraps are just sitting in the landfill, then the methane is going to build up more and not necessarily, and then those food scraps don't, go back into the cycle. So that's why composting is higher than just landfill on the wasted food scale.
Great. All right. Are there any other questions? Well, Well, thank you so much, Nina. I really appreciate your expertise on this. I'm so excited to have learned stuff. I started taking notes and realized that I have the slides. You sent me your slides. So we will be sending out the recording to everybody that was here, as well as everybody that registered. So it will be available if you want to go back and take a look at what those marker bill numbers are, and other things. That information will all be there. Really appreciated learning this, and we look forward to seeing everybody at our next webinar in April. We're actually going to do 2 in April, as it is Earth Month. The first one will be about ending food waste at home. So this is really targeting your, you as a consumer, your volunteers and other individuals. We have the author of Zero Waste Living, Stephanie Miller, who will be joining us for that to talk a little bit about it. And then we will have another webinar later in April, which is about starting a food rescue. Most of you don't need that. I see a lot of folks on here that are already running food rescue organizations, but if you are not, if you are on this webinar just because you're interested in food recovery and might be thinking about it, later in April, we will have a webinar on starting a food rescue. All right, thank you so much. And I'm dropping those links back in the chat just to grab those before you head out. Yes, the webinar is free to share with your community, your volunteers, your program participants, everybody. The more the merrier. All of our webinars are always open to anybody that wants to come. Some people might be bored by them if they're not doing food recovery, but they are always open. Karen, she just clicked the link and it says sales have ended. We will fix that immediately. Give it 10 minutes or so. Karen is probably rushing over to fix it right now. Yeah, it'll be updated within the next few minutes. You can see that she has navigated away from sharing her screen and is now fixing it. So, all right, well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you for the next one. And thanks again, Nina.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye.